Welcome to the City of Escondido's Community Garden. I'm Laura Robinson, Program Coordinator for the city's Recycling and Waste Reduction Division. Today, along with our two program assistants, who you'll meet in a moment, we'll be teaching you about backyard composting. This virtual workshop is in lieu of our quarterly free workshops that are usually held at this wonderful multicultural community garden. We hope that you'll check out the brief description with this video to let you know more about this community garden, the materials we provide, question and answers you may have and how to contact us, and even Escondido Disposal's state-of-the-art anaerobic digester system that will be online in early 2021. We will be teaching you two methods of composting today, backyard and vermicomposting, also known as worm composting. These methods teach you a way to process your organic waste, yard waste and/or food waste to keep it out of the landfill, whether you live on a large property or even in a small apartment. We'll start with Lisette Hurst and backyard composting.
Hi, I'm Lisette and I'm going to be talking to you today about backyard composting. First thing I want to let you guys all know to put your minds at ease is that compost happens naturally, whether you're there tending to it or not. If you're in a forest, you're going to notice that the leaves fall from the trees, settle on the ground, and over time they're going to compost. What we're going to teach you about here today is more urban composting. There are people with larger yards and they can have open heaps of composting. Lori, my coworker, she lives out in Duluth. She's able to compost out in the open. She has a free pile going and she's able to compost like that. She doesn't mind if critters come out there and help in the decomposition process. But a lot of us in urban areas, we like to have a tidier pile, something a little bit more manageable, and we don't want to upset our neighbors with any rodents that it might attract. So that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. There's two reasons usually why people compost. The first one is they want to reduce the amount of waste that ends up in their trash bin every week. That's a great reason to compost. Most of what ends up in our landfill is organic matter, so this is a great way to divert that. The second reason gardeners like to compost is for the soil amendment it produces. It also prevents erosion and it improves the soil quality. Sometimes it can even balance out your pH. So it's a natural way to get that amendment into your gardens and produce healthy crops, fruits, and vegetables and plants. So what you're gonna need when you start composting, you're gonna need a compost bin, a pitchfork, some water, and then you're gonna need your organic material. To start a pile off, you're gonna need at least 1 cubic yard of material to get your compost pile started. So what does that pile consist of? It consists of greens and browns. Greens are the nitrogen source or the protein. That's the part that's going to heat up your pile. It's going to bring all the microorganisms into the middle of your pile to start breaking things down. The microorganisms, I like to think of them as our little hard workers in the middle of our pile. When they start multiplying, they start producing heat, they break things down. The browns are going to be the carbon source. They're going to be the carbohydrates of your compost pile. What that's going to do is it's going to add mass to your pile, which is going to let the air flow through and help the stuff in the middle break down. And it's also going to provide nutrients for the macroorganisms, which are the soil dwelling organisms, the worms, the grubs, the things that are going to come up from the soil to help also break the things down in your pile. So what are examples of greens and browns? Greens, it's pretty obvious. It's going to be stuff that you find in your garden that's green, lawn trimmings, leaves. It could be things like tea bags and coffee. It can also be food scraps from your kitchen, things like fruit and vegetable peelings. You don't want to introduce any proteins like meats, fish, or any oils into your pile. You want to keep those out. So just be careful when you go to you harvest your green materials. Grass, for example, is 85% water. So you're gonna have to put that in your pile within 24 hours of trimming it, or else it's gonna turn into a brown. Browns are things like dried leaves and other trimmings, twigs, sawdust, hay, shredded paper, newspaper, could be dirty napkins, paper towels, and things like that. Those are the browns that you're gonna introduce into your pile. Now, when you go to get started on building your pile, what you're going to want to do is think about this like a lasagna. There's going to be different layers to this pile. I usually start out with a brown layer and then I add a green layer, and it's really important to wet it a little bit. You don't want it to be too wet. You want it to be like the dampness of a wrung out sponge. So once you mix that together, then you start adding the next layers, the brown and the green again. You're going to stir it up again and you're going to add a little bit more water, and you're going to continue this process until your bin is full. It's really important afterwards to keep this bin covered because you want to be able to retain the heat, and you're going to keep out water. Sometimes when it's raining, it can add extra water to your pile, and that'll start slowing your process down. One helpful tip is to chop things up as small as possible. If things are in smaller pieces, they're just going to break down quicker. And it's really helpful with things such as twigs or vines. Also some leaves like magnolia leaves are a little bit waxy and fibrous. If you break those down, it's just going to help speed things up. Another helpful tip is succulents. You want to chop those up because they can sprout again once you go plant them in your garden. So those are really important tips. You want to avoid putting diseased plants or maybe some plants that are covered in insects into your pile. There are also some poisonous plants that you want to keep out of there, like oleanders or hemlock. And there are trees like eucalyptus, bay laurel, walnut, juniper, acacia, cypress. These trees have acids and resins that are toxic to other plants. So when you put these into your pile, you want to make sure you only add a very small amount. And one other green that I didn't mention that people like to add to their piles are manures. You want to make sure that you're only using manure from plant-eating animals like cows, horses, pigs, sheep, and chickens. But make sure when you add this that you recognize this is a green and you don't want to add too much to your pile. People that have been composting for a while, they always stick to a recipe for composting. They usually stick to a 2-to-1 ratio. They'd rather put more browns than greens in their pile. What that does is it helps facilitate the air circulating through your pile, and it reduces the clumping of the greens in the middle. When you have too much green in your pile, a lot of times what it'll do is it'll clump together in a mass in the middle, and you'll need to get in there and you'll need to either add more browns to your pile or get in there and really stir it up. So when you have a little bit more brown than green, it's better to be on that side than having too much green. A lot of times people wonder where they should place their compost bin in their yard. One thing I can say is try not to put it too close to a fence, because eventually over time that might rot the wood a little bit. Since we live in a pretty arid and warm climate, you might want to pick an area in your yard, maybe underneath a shady tree. It's also going to prevent the compost pile from getting too dry. It'll be able to retain its moisture, and it'll keep it shaded from the sun some parts of the day. Over here I'm at the garden. This is our demonstration pile that we have here. It's a 3-bin system, and some people actually do this kind of setup in their own yards. They find that it's pretty conducive to what they're doing. This is the bin where we usually start our pile. So the day of our compost workshop, you'll see someone over here. They'll be doing the layers, the greens and the browns, wetting things, stirring them up, and this is where we start. This pile over here in the middle, this is 3 months into the composting process. So we can take a look. What you're going to see here is it's starting to break down. Things have gotten a lot smaller into smaller pieces. You're starting to see a lot of the rich brown compost forming, but there are still some larger chunks. This still has some work to do in this pile, but you can already start to see that it's starting to break down into beautiful compost. Then this is our pile 6 months into the composting process. And what you see here is beautiful, brown, rich compost. What we've done to get it to be this small, we use a screen. It's made out of chicken wire. We shovel some stuff over from our middle pile, and then we shake it out. And then the pieces that remain in the screen, we just bring it back over to this pile for it to continue composting, but that's not always necessary. You can have a few larger chunks in there, and you could still place it into your garden, and it can continue composting when it's in your garden. When you first start out with your compost pile, you're gonna notice it's pretty high. It's a cubic yard worth of material. If it's not a cubic yard, that's one reason that it might be a slower process, because a cubic yard is optimal for the generation of heat within your pile. Another handy tool that you might want to have for your composting is a thermometer. You can get them on websites online, and or at gardening stores. And what that's going to do is you can go in and test the center of your pile to see if it should be above 120 degrees. It'll be often hotter than that, which is kind of surprising, but there's a lot of magic happening in the center of that pile. One thing you'll notice is when we start our piles here, we don't add any more organic matter to our pile. You can, if you're at home and you want to add maybe some food scraps to the center of your pile, just remember you want to dig in to the middle of your pile and add your food scraps to the middle of the pile in the hottest area, because that's going to help break it down a lot quicker. But if you do add stuff to your pile, just know that it's going to take a little bit longer. The process that we teach, the recipe for composting, we're not adding anything to it. We're adding exactly the same ratio of greens and browns, and we are not adding anything extra to it. that's how it broke down in 6 months. If you do it at home and you add more material to it, it's just going to take a little bit longer, but it's still all going to break down. Some of you may not have a yard at home where you have all this organic material to do backyard composting, or maybe you don't have a garden that you need to provide fertilizer for. So there's other ways to compost. Another way is worm composting. And Lori Calvert, my coworker, is going to be talking to you about that right now.
Hi, I'm Lori. I'm going to talk to you about vermicomposting. Vermicomposting is feeding worms your kitchen scraps, and which they turn into castings, also known as worm poop. Worm castings make an all-natural soil amendment. We recommend this kind of composting for apartment dwellers and people with yards too small to generate enough yard waste to do the backyard composting Lisette spoke of. We also recommend a specific type of worm, red wigglers. Red wigglers are, besides being a cute name, red wigglers consume 2 times their body weight every day, and they reproduce quickly, making them very efficient little consumers. This is our office worm bin. It's a Rubbermaid bin, 10 gallons. We drilled holes into it, air holes. And this is what we use and demonstrate, but you could use anything. You could use an old ice chest or a trash can. We have people come to these compost workshops and tell us they use any number of things. So this isn't what you have to use, this is just what we demonstrate. So to build a worm bin, you take your container and you dampen cardboard and newspaper and you shred them up. That's the litter that the worms live in. And so you fill your container to the top with that. You sprinkle a small spadeful of soil on top of that bedding. And the soil is grit. It provides grit for the worms who don't have teeth, they have gizzards. And so that's how they break the food down, with their gizzards. And then you put a small handful of food in there also, and then finally you put your worms in there. And you just put them in underneath all the newspaper and cardboard and close it up. Once you notice that your worms are processing the food that you've put in there, and by processing I mean there's going to be castings, which is their worm poop, then you can add food to the bin. So I harvested our bin yesterday, and I'm going to show you what our bin looks like. And this is what we used to pull the worms out of, the worm poop. So see, this is kind of a blanket over the top, and this prevents flies and everything from really developing in the worm bin. But as you can see, I've got my damp newspaper. Here's my little bit of food, and here I harvested the worm poop, but this is the leftover. Well, I don't know if you guys can see, but this is the worms. These are adult red wigglers. And just so you know, when you do start a worm bin, they're going to come in all shapes and sizes, because as I said, they reproduce. So there's going to be little teeny white eggs. Well, that's baby worms. And then there'll be, successive sizes. And this here that looks like dirt, this is worm poop. And I'm telling you, it doesn't smell. They're very clean, efficient digesters. So to get to this process where I'm back to the beginning, I mentioned harvesting it earlier. So when I harvest it, I go outside just like this, spread a trash bag out on a table, and then I put all of what's in here on top of it. They don't like the light. That's why this bin is opaque. So the worms will dive down to the bottom of the pile of worm castings. So I take each, and I wear gloves, I take each layer off and I examine it for stragglers. So over here I'm going to put my pile of worm castings, and then back in the bin I'm going to put any straggling worms I come up against. So as you noticed, I had worm castings left at the bottom. So I've gotten most of the castings out. You don't have to worry about disentangling each one and making sure that it's all empty. So then I cover the bin back up, and now I have the soil amendment. I have all that worm poop that you take small amounts of it and you work it into the soil around your plants. You can take a little spadeful of it and put it into a bucket of water, and we call that worm tea. And that's just another vehicle to deliver the fertilizer to your plants. Here are some frequently asked questions.
Yes, it is okay to place weeds in your compost pile. What you'll want to do is place them in a black trash bag and put them out in the sun for a few weeks to get them up to 120 degrees minimum. This will destroy the seeds, so they won't be able to re-sprout. If you have rodents getting into your compost pile, you want to make sure that you aren't adding any meat, fish, fats to the pile. Be sure to bury any foods 6 to 12 inches deep right in the center of the pile. You can also sprinkle cayenne pepper liberally around the pile to deter them. If you notice an odor coming from your compost pile, it could be because there's not enough brown material or your greens are packed too tightly within the pile. What you'll want to do is add browns, mix, and make sure the pile is covered. Rain and excessive water can also slow things down and add to the odors. If nothing seems to be happening with your compost pile, it could be that it's too wet or too dry, or your pile could be too small. Make sure your pile is at least 1 cubic yard, and make sure if it's too wet, you want to add some browns, and if it's too dry, you can add water or more greens. Sourcing browns in the spring or summer here in California can be tough. Some options for browns are shredded paper, soiled paper towels, paper plates, coffee filters, and tea bags. You'll want to moisten and shred and add this in small quantities.
We wanted to share some of the things we subsidize, offer at reduced prices for your compost journey. This is the actual worm bin, and as Lori described, it needs to be dark so light can't get in, and we've already drilled the holes in it. We sell these for $5. And when you're getting worms, there are some resources or places where you can find them. Grangetto's, Petco, and also online. Occasionally we have some live worms to sell. You can check with us.
The other compost bin we have available here at the city is the Geo bin. This is my favorite compost bin. It's the one that we used in the middle of our compost piles over here. It is a hard plastic sleeve that you unwrap and then you put it together with nuts and screws, and it's really easy to place in your yard. What I love most about this is when I go to stir out my piles, I'm able to lift it easily and move it around my yard. This is a great bin. It doesn't come with a lid, but you can use what we did over in our garden where we use plastic bags or tarps. You can use an old rug that you've got lying around, a trash can lid, anything will work. This is a great bin and it's for the low price of $10. And anyone who comes to our garden or compost workshops usually leaves with one of these little tabletop containers. It's got a lid, and this is where you would collect your food scraps, and this is where you take the food scraps and put them into your worm bin or into your compost pile. And inside is some great literature for you. We also have a little informational wheel that has, one side has some nice little tips for composting, the other side has any issues that you might encounter. It tries to resolve some of those issues like commonly found problems. And if you come to pick up one of these bins from us over at Public Works, we will provide you with one of these bins.
This is the other type of compost bin that we sell. It's called the Fisker bin. It's $20, so it's twice as much as our original version, but this is why some people like it. You don't have to hook it to itself, you just unhook it, it kind of pops up like an IKEA hamper. And it's got a lid. So that's it. It's got a lid, comes with some stakes to stake it to the ground. So like the original version, it's still your compost can, communicate with the ground, but it's a little more self-contained, it's got everything you need, and it's the same size too, 3 cubic yards.